Amelia Dyer. Unlike the many generations before her, Amelia Dyer was not the product of grinding poverty. She was born the youngest of 5 with 3 brothers and a sister in a small village just east of Bristol. The daughter of a master shoemaker and Sarah Hobley, she learned to read and write and develop a love of literature and poetry. However, her somewhat privileged childhood was marred by the mental illness of her mother, caused by typhus. Amelia witnessed her mother's violent fits and was obligated to care for her until she died in 1848. Researchers would later comment on the effects that this had on Amelia, and also what it would teach Amelia about the signs exhibited by those who appeared to lose their mind through illness. After her mother's death, Amelia lived with an aunt in Bristol for a while before serving an apprenticeship with a corset maker. Her father died in 1859. Her eldest brother inherited the shoe business. In 1861, at the age of 24, Amelia became permanently estranged from the last one of her brothers, James, and moved into lodging on Trinity Street, Bristol. There she married a man named George. He was 59 and they both lied about their ages on their marriage certificate to reduce the age gap. George deducted 11 years from his age and Amelia added 6. Many sources later report that this age, as a fact, caused much confusion. For a couple of years after marrying George, she trained as a nurse, a somewhat grueling job in Victorian times, but it was seen as a respectable occupation, and it enabled her to acquire many useful skills. From contact with a midwife, she learned of an easier way to earn a living, using her own home to provide lodging for young women who had conceived illegitimately, and then farming off babies for adoption or allowing them to die of neglect and malnutrition. Unmarried mothers back in Victorian England often struggled to gain an income since the 1984 Poor Law Amendment Act had removed any financial obligation from the fathers of illegitimate children. Whilst bringing up their children in a society where single parenthood and illegitimacy were stigmatized, this led to the practice of baby farming, in which individuals would act as an adoption or fostering agent, and in return for regular payments or a single upfront fee from the baby's biological mother. Many businesses were set up to take in these young women and care for them until they gave birth. The mothers subsequently left their unwanted babies to be looked after by these children nurses. The predicament of the parents involved was often exploited for financial gain. If a baby had well-off parents who were simply anxious to keep the birth a secret, a single fee might be as much as £80. £50 might be negotiated if the father of the child wanted to hush up his involvement. However, it was more common for these expectant young women, whose immortality even precluded acceptance at the time into workhouses, to be impoverished. Such women would only be charged about £5. At some point in Amelia's baby farming career, she prepared to forego this expense and inconvenience of letting these children die through neglect and starvation. Soon after she got the receipt of each child, she would murder them, thus allowing her to pocket most or all of the entrance fee. For some time, Dyer eluded the interest of police. She was eventually caught in 1879, after a doctor was suspicious about the number of child deaths he had been called to clarify at the Dyers. However, instead of being convicted of the murder or manslaughter, she was just sentenced to 6 months hard labor. Allegedly, the experience almost destroyed her mentally, though others have expressed it didn't do much. Upon release, she attempted to resume her nursing career. She had spells of mental hospitals due to her alleged mental instability and suicidal tendencies. These always coincided with times when it was convenient for her to disappear. Being a former asylum nurse, Amelia knew how to behave to ensure a relatively comfortable existence in an asylum. Dyer appeared to have begun abusing alcohol and opium-based products earlier in her killing career. Her mental instability could have been related to her substance abuse. In 1890, Dyer cared for an illegitimate baby of a governess. When she returned to visit her child, the governess was immediately suspicious and stripped the baby to see if a birthmark was present on its hip. It wasn't. And her prolonged suspicions led the authorities to Dyer. Dyer at one point drank 2 bottles of laudanum in a serious suicide attempt. But after long-term abuse, she had built up a tolerance to the opium product, so she survived. She then returned to baby farming and murdering. Dyer realized the folly of involving doctors to issue death certificates and began disposing of the bodies herself. The precarious nature and extent of her activities again prompted undesirable attention. She was alert to the attention of the police again, and parents seeking to reclaim their children. She and her family frequently relocated to many different towns, different cities, just to escape suspicion and to regain anonymity, and, of course, to acquire new business. Over the years, it was found that Dyer had used a succession of aliases. In 1893, she was discharged from her final committal at Wells Mental Asylum. Unlike previous breakdowns, this had been a most disagreeable experience, and she never entered another asylum. 2 years later, she moved to Berkshire, accompanied by Jane Granny Smith, who Amelia had recruited from a brief spell in a warehouse, and Amelia's daughter and son-in-law. This was followed by a move to Reading, Berkshire, later in the same year. He was persuaded by Amelia to refer her as mother in front of innocent women, handing over their children, as to present a caring mother-child image. In January of 1896, Evelina Morman, a popular 25-year-old barmaid, gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, Doris, in a boarding house. She quickly sought offers of adoption and placed an advertisement in Miscellaneous in the Bristol Times and Mirror newspaper. It simply read, "Wanted, respectable woman to take young child." Coincidentally, right next to her own advertisement read, "Married couple with no family, would adopt healthy child, nice country home, terms £10. Marman responded, and a few days later received a prompt reply from Dyer. From Oxford Road in Reading, she wrote, "I should be glad to have a dear little baby girl, one I can bring up and call my own." She continued, "We are plain, homely people in fairly good circumstances. I don't want a child for money's sake, but for company and home comfort. Myself and my husband are dearly fond of children. I have no child of my own. A child with me will have a good home and a mother's love." Marman wanted to pay a more affordable weekly fee for the care of her daughter, but she insisted on being given the one-off payment in advance. Marman was in desperate straits, so she reluctantly agreed to pay the £10, and a week later, she arrived. Marman was apparently surprised at Dyer's advanced age and stocky appearance, but Dyer seemed affectionate towards Doris. Evelina handed over her daughter, a cardboard box of clothes, and the 10 pounds. Still distressed at having to give up care for her daughter, she accompanied Dyer to the station and then on to Gloucester. She returned to her lodging a broken woman. A few days later, she had received a letter saying all is well. Marman wrote back but received no reply. Dyer did not travel to Reading, as she had told Marman. Instead, she went to 76 Mayo Road in London, where her 23-year-old daughter Polly was staying. There, Dyer quickly found some white ending tape used in dressmaking, wound it twice around the baby's neck, and then tied a knot. Death would have not been immediate. Both women allegedly helped wrap the body in a napkin. They kept some of the clothes Marman had packed. The rest was destined for the pawnbroker. Dyer paid the rent to the unwritten landlady and gave a pair of the child's boots as a present for her little girl. The following day, Wednesday, April 1st, 1896, another child named Harry Simmons was taken to Mayo Road. However, with no spare white edging tape available, the length of Doris's corpse was removed and they used it to strangle the 13-month-old baby boy. On April 2nd, both bodies were stacked into a carpet bag, along with bricks for added weight, and then tossed into the river. Unknown to Dyer, on March 30th, 1896, a package was received from Reading by a bargeman. It contained the body of a baby girl, later identified as Helena Fry. In the small detective force available to the Reading Borough Police, a detective constable made a crucial breakthrough, as well as finding a label from Temple Meads Station, Bristol. He used microscopic analysis of the wrapping paper and deciphered a faint, legible name, Mrs. Thomas, and an address. The evidence was enough to lead police to Dyer, but they still had no strong evidence to connect her directly with such a serious crime. Additional evidence they gleaned from witnesses and information obtained from Bristol police only served to increase their concerns. The officers decided to use a young woman as a decoy, hoping she would be able to secure a meeting with Dyer to discuss her services. This may have been designed to help detectives to positively link Dyer to her business activity, or it may have simply been to give them a reliable opportunity to arrest her. It transpired that Dyer was expecting a new client, the decoy, to call, but instead she found detectives waiting on her doorstep. On April 3rd, police raided her home. They were apparently struck by the stench of human decomposition, although no human remains were found. There was, however, plenty of other related evidence, including white edging tape, telegraphs regarding adoption arrangements, pawn tickets for children's clothing, receipts for advertisement, and letters from mothers inquiring about the well-being of their children. The police calculated that in previous months alone, at least 20 children had been placed in the care of Mrs. Thomas, now revealed as Amelia Dyer. It also appeared that she was about to move home again. This rate of murder has led to some estimates that Mrs. Dyer may, over the course of decades, have killed well over 400 babies and children, making her one of the most prolific murderers ever, as well as the most prolific murderess ever. Dyer was arrested on April 4th and charged with murder. Her son-in-law, Arthur, was charged as an accessory. During April, the Thames was dragged and 6 more bodies were discovered, including Doris Marman and Harry Simmons, Dyer's last victims. Each baby had been strangled with white tape, which she later told police was how you can tell that one was mine. 11 days after handing her daughter to Dyer, Morman, whose name had emerged in items kept by Dyer, identified her daughter's remains. It only took the jury 4.5 minutes to find her guilty. In her 3 weeks in the prison, she filled 5 exercise books with her last truth and only confession. Visited the night before her execution by the chaplain, she asked if anything she had to confess. She offered her books, saying, "Isn't this enough?" Curiously, she was subpoenaed to appear as a witness in Polly's trial for murder, set for a week after her own execution date. However, it was ruled that Amelia was already legally dead once sentenced, and that therefore her evidence would be inadmissible in court. Thus, her execution was not delayed. On the eve of her execution, Amelia heard the charges against Polly had been dropped. She was hanged by James Billington at Newgate Prison on Wednesday, 10th June, 1896. Asked on the scaffold if she had anything to say, and she responded, "I have nothing to say," just before being dropped at 9 a.m. precisely.